Here we go. And so we're going to be starting the next chapter called Selecting a Teacher. And as we finish the last chapter on seeking enlightenment, I was reminded after David's story of how mental well-being is just a thought away. I was on staff at a state mental hospital in Northwest Iowa when my daughters, who are now grown women, were like probably 6 and 8 years old, or 5 and 7. And I went to the hospital on Saturday because I was on call, and the resident did most of the work. I just had to get a report from him, and then but I was contacted that there were a couple of orders that I needed to go up to the women's unit to sign off on from the week, and this was Saturday morning. So I took my daughters with me, and we walked on to the unit, and there was a lady who was, as you said, David, it was back in the past, being terribly assaulted by somebody in her family, I think sexually and physically, and she was screaming and sobbing, and it was very real. It was very clear, and she was being held and tried to be comforted, and she was tearing at her clothes, and suddenly she saw my 2 daughters, and that brought her to this world, and she suddenly stopped all of this screaming and yelling and sobbing, and she said, "Oh my God, Dr. Pettit, they are so beautiful. Is there any chance I could talk with them?" And I said, "Of course, Joanne, you could talk with them." And we got 4 chairs, and the 4 of us sat down, and she asked my daughters, Molly and Maggie, what they were doing in school and how school was going. Wow. Now, if you had it on film, you'd say, wait a minute, what the hell happened here? But something became more important than her thinking. And I was at this recent thing in Spain, and I've asked this man from Russia if he can find, because I remembering that there were records of when the Germans were invading Russia, they hit a mental hospital with bombs, and people were injured, and things were on fire, and there were records of people who had not spoken in many, many years and were catatonic, suddenly rose to help people that were wounded, to help people seek cover, they were as something had become more important than the thinking that they had been locked into. And I guess my message is to really realize, and if those that we seek can realize, that this mental well-being is always there. It's not, doesn't have to be created. It just has to be uncovered. And our consciousness has to somehow shift to something more important to us than our thinking. Anyway, that I just wanted to share that, because to reiterate what you had said, David, with your story of how it truly is present always.
That's beautiful.
So selecting a teacher, I guess I get to go start again. There are so many teachers in the world and so many theories about life. When selecting a teacher, ask yourself, is my teacher a well-balanced person? Is he or she happy? Does my teacher reflect and demonstrate the quality of life I desire? If the answer to any of these questions is no, move on in your journey. Otherwise, you may become one of the blind, led by the blind. It's pretty clear. I don't know if anybody has any thoughts.
No.
Did you want to go forward?
Yeah, I can go forward. I have great admiration for the clergy and therapists of this world. They are both helpers of humanity. Only their approach and words differ. The preacher attempts to purify our souls. The therapist attempts to purify our consciousness. Originally, psychology examined the connection between mind and soul, until that theory was abandoned. When psychologists stopped investigating the connection between mind and soul, they lost two of the most important clues to what they sought. They focused instead on behavior, leading us away from our true psychological nature, ultimately encouraging us as a passive victims of life.
You know, from a person from Sid who had very little education and certainly had never studied psychology in depth, as a, you know, when I was working on my doctoral degree in psychology, it's the first thing I realized is there was so much conversation about behavior as though we could change it. And since I was already involved in the three principles for a long time before I went back to school, I was like, well, wait a minute. You know, behavior is way after the fact. And yet, you know, my pleas fell on deaf ears, because it's really true that, you know, when a given field, it's like you do hear what you're thinking. And so when a given field is committed to studying the outcomes and after effects of a source or a cause without looking deeper to see, well, where did that start? It's really hard to raise that question. And I think that really helped me to understand why so many people, you know, had difficulty relating initially into what we were talking about, because it really was very foreign to the prevailing thinking that, you know, we have to deal with behaviors. You know, we just have to change those behaviors and get people to see that you can't do that. You've got to do this other thing. And I saw the innocence in it, you know, just from having those conversations with people, because I knew that they were wonderful people who were, you know, really, really committed to helping humanity.
Right.
Yeah.
And to think that, like he says, that psychology originally from the Greek roots mean the study of the soul, the study of the non-formed part of being human. There was some acknowledgement of the spiritual quality of being alive, that you had, yes, you had this form, but psychology was studying that which didn't have the form. But like he said, because they couldn't explain that, they went to, so we have the Department of Behavioral Medicine, right? Psychiatry and behavioral medicine. And we have biological psychiatry. And you know that I've been kind of sarcastically say that it reminds you of that story of the man who was somewhat inebriated that lost his keys and was looking for them 30 yards from where he last saw them, but under the light post because the light was better there. Even though he, at some level, he knew that wasn't where the answers were. And the idea that, to me, when I was in Copenhagen, we were on one of those little trains that goes around the amusement park, and it's not on a rail. And I had this thought that trying to change behavior would be like that little train pointing the caboose in a different direction.
Yeah.
And thinking that that's going to change the direction of the train.
Right.
Because like you said, the behavior is the quality, is the product of what people are thinking and perceiving, and then acting on, behaving based on
what they
see, you know. So anyway, but that's, I mean, that's so, it's so crucial.
Right.
Yeah. Anybody before we go?
No, we can go forward.
Okay. Okay.
From behaviorism, a multitude of techniques arose, but I can assure you techniques are to therapists as rituals are to the church. They lead you away from the very truth you seek. Please realize I'm not condemning current teachings. I'm simply saying that many don't realize the importance of finding one's own inner wisdom. There is an enormous difference between finding your own inner wisdom and adopting someone else's beliefs. If you take on someone else's beliefs to replace a belief of your own, you may experience a temporary placebo effect, but you have not found a lasting answer. However, if you replace an old belief with the realization from your own inner wisdom, the effect and results are superior and permanent. It is one thing to listen to the words of the wise, and quite another to be a follower. Any good teacher will tell you never to be a follower. A wise teacher will draw out your own innate knowledge.
Wow.
That's powerful too. Yep.
Hugely powerful. Yeah, I think one of my favorite parts in the whole book.
Yeah.
Because it's, you can tell someone, a certain situation is X, or that things taste a certain way, or whatever, but actually it's that individual's relationship with what they experience and how it feels for them that is so much more powerful. And if you can see for yourself something has shifted and is different from how it was a minute ago, well, that's nothing to do with the conversation. That's your own experience showing you what's a more comfortable way. And you can't, that's golden. That's your own, and that's the truth we're trying to point people towards, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. And it's so interesting that the word education comes from the Latin root to draw out.
You
can't draw something out unless it's already in there.
Yeah.
And so what we're really talking about is true education, is helping people realize what they already know or remember, what's within them. Yeah.
It's funny. I had a phone call from a veteran that was in my group here for quite a while, and then he moved to another state because his elderly mother was quite ill, and as much as he was struggling with his own life, he felt that he had to go and help her. And he went and moved in with his mother, and I hadn't heard or seen anything from him, and he called to wish me happy Thanksgiving. He
Wow.
just called him, and I thought how sweet that was, that he had my cell phone, found my cell phone number, and I guess he was calling friends, and he called to wish me happy Thanksgiving. And I said, well, how's it going with your mother? And he said, it's been very humbling, because she gave me a lot of good advice when I was little, and I didn't usually listen that well. And a lot of my troubles have come from not paying attention to the things my mother told me. And now she doesn't know what she's talking about, and she barely knows me, and she's not listening to me. And I got a feeling for what it must have been like.
For her talking and him not listening. That's funny.
And he said, at first I was so resentful. I'm trying to help her to, not fall and not burn herself and not do this, not do that. And he said, I was suddenly filled with this humility to realize that until my life went so terrible that I had to start seeing for myself what I was doing to myself, I never really listened to her. And that kind of goes to the point of this chapter, that weak people can tell us what to do, but until we see it for ourselves, until we see our own right way, it's not going to work for us. I thought that was so sweet, though. It really was.
I mean, I'm not speaking of any karma or anything, but we do have the experience sometimes of what goes around comes around, right?
Yeah. So anyway, do you want me to go on and read?
You can.
So,
yeah.
Followers fail. They readily adopt another's beliefs and cease to think for themselves. Never follow the words of others blindly, or you will only take on another person's reality. You will only hinder your progress by seeking fool's gold. Use your own common sense. Beware of cults and organizations that want to strip you of your right to think freely. If you become a follower, you lose your independence and become a slave to someone else's ideas and beliefs. You give up your free will and freedom of thought, two extremely valuable assets in life.
Wow.
Yeah. I think for a lot of people, that I often have read this chapter to people who started saying, well, everybody makes this big thing about Sid Banks, and isn't this just another cult? And I think, well, it would have been, except that he didn't believe in cults and didn't want us to listen to him. He wanted us to listen to ourselves, to find the wisdom in the feeling behind his words. And I was on a phone call the other day with a group of people that are working on translations of The Missing Link in various languages, and Shane Kennedy, who's organizing this, and one of the people was saying it was so difficult because languages, I think she was Italian, and she was saying about the word you meant something different, as that we don't have an equivalent of the plural you all, kind of all of you versus you personally. And she was getting very caught up in, how difficult translation could be. And one of the other people on the call, who I believe was from Germany, said, most of the people in my group don't speak English, and I speak to them in German, but I always play a Sid Banks tape in the beginning, or play part of a Sid Banks tape, and it affects them. And she said it really brings the group down into a quiet space. And I think it's partially,
even those that don't understand.
They don't speak English, and they don't know what if they did, the Scottish accent would get in the way too.
Right. But there's a feeling.
They pick up on the feeling.
Yeah.
And then we all kind of agreed to that the best way to listen to Sid really is to not, to act like you don't really know what he's saying, and just hear yourself, hear the quiet, and hear the deeper feeling. And that sounds woo-woo and strange, and yet I think all of us know that when we talk about, why do people meditate? Why do people go to religious ceremonies? They're looking for that feeling?
Yeah.
And we have it. We always have it accessible to us. And it's just, just calming down, coming to quiet. And I think that's what this chapter is pointing to, that selecting a teacher is to look at somebody that's wise enough to know that you already know.
It reminds me of that. Without details, I had a little gal who was only about 7 years old who had witnessed something really terrifying. And we had one of those, that little CD that we had on attitude that Sid did for the medical students.
Yeah.
He would listen to that at night and fall asleep. She said that old man's voice allows me to get quiet. And I she was 7, so she'd say something like, I don't know why I love listening. I don't know what he's saying, but I love listening to that old man's voice. He relaxes me. But it's just what you said, Judy. She didn't understand the words, but there was something in the quality of his quiet and where he was speaking from that allowed her mind to quiet down a bit. Yeah.
It's funny. It reminded me. I used to play Sid tapes at the beginning of when I did groups at the dual diagnosis unit, and everybody in the group would start to fall asleep. And then the nurses would see that from their window. The window to the group room faced the nurses' station, and they would come running in and start waking people up. And I'd say, no. Right. These are people whose minds have been racing. They can't sleep. They can never shut their thoughts off. Right. And let them sleep. It's okay. And she's going, well, it's very disrespectful. You're trying to do group. And I said, this is group. Okay. It's the sleep group. Just leave them alone.
Allowing their mind to quiet. Yeah.
And I find that true with my veterans too. A lot of them that have been very wound up and very, struggling so much with all these memories and confusing thoughts, that sometimes when they get really quiet in group, they'll just fall asleep, and then they'll wake up with a start, and they'll be so apologetic, and I'll say, no, it's beautiful. That's what you need.
It's beautiful.
Yeah.
Before we stop today, I really want to give again, remembering our audience of people who have been struggling with memories from past difficult times and behaviors. Ofer, did you have anything that you wanted to share from this, or anything as we end today?
I think one of the things that happens when you experience combat in a traumatic way is that something in your ability to use your common sense kind of goes away for a while, because what you consider common sense is something more, it's like you get stuck in survival mode.
Mm.
And like you're using common sense, just different common sense. And I think one of the thing that was, I don't know if it was hard for me because it just happened, but sometimes I find it challenging is to understand which of the voices is the common sense one.
Mm-hmm.
So, and it has to do with the feeling, like it was said here. It's like I listen to the feeling of my thinking, and then I can understand. But I do believe that it's important to find the right teacher, because therapist or whatever you're gonna go, you need to find someone that. And it's not, something when they say, it says here like something about my teacher reflect and demonstrate the quality of life I desire. I find this troubling because sometimes the best teacher, the worst teachers present something which is not true. So it's very hard to choose a teacher by what he demonstrates, the way he lives, And I find that the best teachers are more authentic, and they will be more open about their misgivings or their failings or whatever. And I think that's a better way to choose a teacher.
I really relate to what you said about authentic, because I've had some brilliant teachers, in an academic sense in my life, who were personally pretty messed up, but they really knew their subject matter. So maybe I learned a lot about Greek history, or I learned a lot about political science or whatever, but I didn't learn anything about life. And I really do. I mean, I don't want to embarrass Bill, but since Bill was my first teacher in this work, I have to acknowledge that the first thing I noticed about Bill is that he was completely comfortable with the fact that he was hiring my company to help him out of a difficult situation with the management of his practice. And, most of the doctors that I had met before that were very defensive, like, well, I had this terrible manager and she didn't do a good job and I was too busy to notice. And Bill just said, look, I don't really know much about business and I don't care that much about it. I really enjoy my patients. So I think I need some help here. And he was so authentic and so okay with it, that it was shocking to me. It was like, my God, that's actually a really real human being there. He's just like a regular person. That he doesn't act like a doctor. He doesn't identify with his title. He identifies with the fact that, hey, all of us have the thing we do and the thing we don't do. And I think that's it really struck me. It's such a simple, small thing, but I couldn't get it off my mind that I never met anybody like that before in the business world.
But I hear your point, and I think I just echo what, and that's very kind of you, Judy. But just that it is important, Ofer, that even if we have something to point to and teach, that we admit that we're still on the learning journey ourselves.
Right.
And like Sid says, it's completely natural for people to get psychological viruses.
Mm-hmm.
That's natural, but I think the important thing is that he says we've been given a virus detector, and you just alluded to it, Ofer. It's the feeling level, and there's a difference from having a virus for 3 hours or 3 days, and having it for 30 years. And I think as the level of understanding that we're talking about incubates quietly, it's not through the intellect. We will, and even those that are listening, I just want to throw out to them that no matter if you're still struggling, that you're going in the right direction, just the fact that you're listening to this. And there is a wisdom within you. You're not the exception. There is no one listening who is to the exception to the rule that they have spiritual wisdom within them, a formless wisdom, because It's what we as human beings are,
Mhm.
in addition to being a thinker. And anyway, so David, did you have anything before we stop?
I think you've all summed it up beautifully. Yeah, no, thank you very much.
So we will remember that living in the now on page 97 is where we'll start next time.
Okay.
That's a novel
I put the envelope in.
idea. Good. The envelope is in place.